And it is the Saturday Coffee Klatch with Heather Lofthouse and yours truly, Robert Reich. Heather, it's been a tough week.
Whoa.
Are you okay?
I'm okay, but I'm scared, honestly.
Well, it's scary. I'm scared at how thin our civic culture seems to be. I mean, we're just, a heinous shooting causes just this wild divisiveness to be even worse.
That's it. It feels exacerbated, and people are more confused than they were. How are you?
I'm okay, but I've been thinking about the question of political violence. Not a happy question, but I'm not sure that there is more now. I mean, the consensus is there's been a huge increase in political violence, but I'm old enough.
Yes, let's talk about this, because I'm not old enough.
I am old enough before your time. I mean, I was a young person in the 60s when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated and Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. And then some years later, almost, I guess, a decade later, Harvey Milk was assassinated.
And John F. Kennedy? You forgot him. He was first.
Oh, that's right. I mean, the first big assassination of my lifetime. And every one of those was frightening, was awful. And
those were elected officials, right?
Because they're elected officials. Yeah. But also, even before that, in 1964, a fellow who was one of my protectors, because I was very short and I very often asked older boys to protect me, named Mickey Schwerner, was murdered trying to register voters in Mississippi by the Ku Klux Klan. Talk about violence. Talk about political violence.
Him and others.
2 other civil rights workers as well. It makes me remember this whole question of political violence, that we are a very violent culture.
But how is it different now? I mean, has social media, I wasn't alive then. I'll remind you of that multiple times on this conversation. But so what is it? What did it feel like back then?
It felt absolutely frightening, disorienting.
And you'd listen to the radio and you'd look in the newspaper and you'd talk to friends.
And the television. I remember sitting there with my father watching television when Lee Harvey Oswald was assassinated. And Lee Harvey Oswald had assassinated John F. Kennedy, and he was assassinated on television. I mean, right there by a fellow named Jack Ruby. And my father, was just, and I, sitting there watching this. We thought the country was nuts, coming apart. And again, in 68, I had the same feeling after Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy were assassinated. I thought, this place, this country, I love America, but it is nutsy, nutso. Guns. And now, of course, even more guns.
And what did you do? So what did you do after that? You woke up the next day. What did everyone do then?
Well, I think there was a sense of total shock and helplessness and vulnerability. Everybody remembers now, who was alive at the time, John F. Kennedy's assassination. I was in high school. There was everybody was crying. Teachers were crying.
Yeah.
Everybody on the bus was crying. I just remember tears everywhere.
This is what my mom has always told me, too, because she kind of explained it all to me, and then we saw the movies about it.
And it just seemed impossible. This young man, John F. Kennedy, who we all, when you have a president like that, you project all of your hopes on him and his young wife and everybody else involved in that administration. We had projected all our hopes. So that assassination was, I guess, the beginning of our loss of innocence, in a way. But again, thinking back on America and thinking back on our history of slavery and our history of seeking to essentially wipe out our indigenous Native American population, which was a violent the most violent act. I mean, here in California, you can't imagine the violence that was condoned. This is a violent country, Heather. I mean, let's not make any bones about it. This is there's a deep streak of horrific violence toward black people, toward immigrants. It goes way back.
But it felt like, I don't know, this week has been so eye-opening. To your point, I mean, I keep thinking back to what you're describing. So then Lyndon Johnson gets sworn in, right, immediately. But what did he do? What was society, was the vibe not as divisive?
It was not nearly as divisive.
And I say vibe on purpose because it feels like social media.
Well, it certainly was divisive in terms of North and South.
Right.
And at that time, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, the South was mostly Democratic.
Right.
The North was mostly Republican. There was a huge racial tension in America. And I remember that Lyndon Johnson did use the Kennedy assassination as a pretext for moving forward with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And even when my friend Mickey Schwerner was murdered, Lyndon Johnson, that was just on the eve of the Civil Rights Act. I mean, he made speeches about the sacrifices that people were making to achieve civil rights and voting rights. There was still much more of a sense of unity in the country. Obviously, we didn't have social media. We had Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite, and we had leaders, not necessarily politically leaders,
right,
but they were leaders who helped remind the country that we were in the same kind of experiment together, experiment in terms of a democracy. And I think that's one of the big differences today. Not so much social media, obviously that is a big difference, but we don't any longer have a leader who reminds us that we're in it together, who heals the wounds, who does even what Abraham Lincoln did in the Civil War, which is said, with malice toward none, trying to bring us together. No, we have a leader who, in response to the assassination of Charlie Kirk said exactly the reverse. I mean, said this is all because of leftist perpetrators. This is the radical left.
Right. And it feels like, I mean, it's interesting because I do think we're looking for a kind of parent figure. I mean, I would hope that there would be someone who would say, okay, enough is enough. These are our values. This is a bigger picture, but that is exactly not what's happening.
Well, no, and I think that the traditional role of president in the United States,
the norm.
I mean, we are reminded of what the norms are because of the breaking of the norm. People took for granted so much before Donald Trump. And the norm that we took for granted is that a president's role in times of strife and stress and polarization and events like
emergencies and chaos and this,
that's right, was to reassure
traumas.
The country and to remind us of what we have in common and to heal the wounds. And I think that that's what we understood a very major part of a president's role to be, because there are ideals that hold us together. There are hopes that hold us together. On my book tour, I talked to a lot of people who said to me that they were Republicans, but professed to have very similar values.
Right. Well, it's the common good, not the common bad.
It's the common good, Heather. It is a common good. And yes, we have polarized politics. And what happened in the House, on the House of Representatives Wednesday night, after there was an attempt to have some sort of a response to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the whole place blew up in partisan anger. Well, I don't think that really reflects the average American. I think the average American is trying to do the best job he or she can possibly do, to hold their family together, to put food on the table, to pay the rent, to be a good neighbor, to be a good parent, to to really uphold values that we, in many ways, have together. I mean, there are differences, obviously, key differences, but the most important aspect of a democracy is that we agree on how to resolve our differences. Not that we don't have differences, but we agree that we're going to resolve our differences through something called a democratic process.
Right. The means for discussion, we kind of decide, we agree to the rules, right?
We agree to the rules. We don't necessarily like the rules.
Right.
We don't like what comes out of the process all the time. Some of us, I mean, the abortion would be a good example in terms of the country very, very divided over whether a woman should be able to have an abortion or when. The Supreme Court makes a decision in 1973, and then the Supreme Court changes it, and there's a lot of tumult. But most people say, okay, well, that's the rule of the land. I don't like it, but I'm going to live with it.
And then you find different levers, right? There's the state level, there's nonprofits, there's...
And the genius of the system, to the extent that there is a genius behind the system of government, is that you have all of these checks and balances, or we had all the checks and balances, and you also have federalism. You have different layers of government capable of doing different things for different populations. But we seem to have come to a point where nobody or very few people trust the outcomes. Very few people trust even the process any longer. Now, I would say that that's a huge consequence of money in politics over the last 40 years.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I have talked about it. I saw the beginning. It's just a gusher of money, and that has distorted politics and made people afraid and made people angry and made people feel like the system is rigged against them. And it is rigged.
The system is definitely rigged, but I think it's so hard not to tease out what's reality and what's a conspiracy theory now. And to your point, the data, what do the data show about political violence? And is this, we can all agree, this, what happened this week is horrific. And this poor man's children, I mean, it's awful. But was it a lone actor? I mean, more is going to be revealed. Or is it part of a bigger trend? And I think we got to pay attention to what is actually happening and not fall for people who are painting a false picture, right?
Most of the political violence that we've seen, certainly over the last few years, is lone actors. Now, we do have instances such as the assault on the U.S. Capitol.
January 6th,
on January 6th, 2021, which is not a lone actor, or to the extent that there's any lone actor behind it, that lone actor is now in the Oval Office. But most of the political violence directed historically has been lone actors, people who are not fully mentally able to make decisions that they should make, plus the easy availability of guns. And those two together have created a mixture that is not new to America. That's my point.
Which is depressing.
This goes, well, it is depressing. And our
because
inability...
we watched it. And there was a school shooting, right, on the same day that Charlie Kirk was murdered.
On the same day.
Yeah.
A school shooting, not very much publicity given to the school shooting. And we are, again, talk about norms. The norm has almost shifted so that we expect school shootings, which is frightening. I'm a grandfather of somebody in school. You're a mother of somebody in school. We don't want to even think about the possibility of that our children or grandchildren.
And I don't want them to have to think about it.
And they shouldn't have to think about it either.
And do drills and...
Well, again, it is a violent culture. But listen to what Donald Trump had to say.
Do I have to?
Well, I want to.
I know we
say
do
this because it is an example of what we're up against. And this is Wednesday night, right now. This is the President of the United States. He says that for years those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charles, and he talked about Charlie Kirk, to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. this kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now. Well, we can agree that there is no place in America for political violence. I mean, let's all agree. Let's stipulate that. But to blame one side of a political conflict, and by the way, Donald Trump, when he says, and he uses the term radical left, he has described the entire Democratic Party as the radical left.
Right.
So
there's no nuance.
There's nuance.
Right. Right.
I mean, you're talking about somebody who doesn't do nuance,
right.
doesn't know nuance, but to actually to fan the flames of partisanship seems to me to be
out of the gate.
The height.
I know.
The height of irresponsibility. At least you had the governor of Utah, who very, very responsibly, a Republican who stood there and said, no, we must not allow this to create more partisan violence.
Right, and he referenced the assassinations in the 60s and gave a historical context.
Very responsible, and I think calling out politicians who were actually fanning the flames, fueling violence.
So what do we do, Bob?
Well, I think one thing that's very, very important is that the public has got to see Republicans, people on the right, or however we want to define the right, and people who are Democrats or people on the left, progressives, talking to each other civilly, modeling a kind of civil discussion.
Discourse. Do we have to have someone here on the Klatch? We should invite someone.
I think we might.
I think we should.
I think that's a good idea. But because part of democracy is democratic deliberation.
And discourse.
Discourse.
But deliberation is very specific, right? You're setting up conversation and analytical back and forth.
They're thinking. I tell my students always, in fact, I taught yesterday, even though I'm retired, the best way of understanding your own position is to talk with somebody who disagrees with you, because that makes it imperative that you check your assumptions, you check their assumptions.
Yeah.
There's a possibility of having an open mind, and you have to have an open mind,
right.
and be able to change your assumptions. And I think that we've lost the art of deliberation. We've lost the art of democratic deliberation. And this predates social media. Heather, I remember I was in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, I started going television, and I would be involved in yelling programs. I mean, they just yelled. People on the other side, the conservatives and we would just yell. And I remember one particular program when we all had little earbuds connected to a producer, and I would be yelling at somebody, and then we discovered on this one particular program how much we agreed. And I said, well, you're absolutely right. And he said, I was going to say that to you too. Isn't that great? And we started agreeing, and in my earbud, the producer said, stop agreeing. Start yelling. We want more yelling. We want more disagreement.
Right, too civil.
Too civil, because you see,
views.
The notion was that anger was monetized. Anger would generate more revenue.
Right. People are going to change the channel if you're just agreeing.
Exactly. It wasn't entertainment enough. This is the era of Rush Limbaugh. This is the era
when Bill O'Reilly in the early days, right?
With Roger Ailes. Well, in 1996, Roger Ailes took over the reins at the start of Fox News, and loved what Limbaugh was doing on the radio, and thought, well, let's use that same formula of anger and humor that was really ridicule directed at the left, and maybe we can do exactly what he's doing on the radio in a bigger way on television.
And he was right.
He was right.
And he did it.
Sadly.
Okay, so more deliberation, and I think you mean personally, right? I do feel like it's hard even with family members who disagree. A lot of people, we just don't do politics. We do everything but politics. So personal deliberation, we need to get better at. But then in our democracy, I mean, you watched the Supreme Court this week making fascinating decisions that we didn't know was happening.
The Supreme Court is a good example of where we have, the norm used to be that the court, if it was making a controversial decision especially, it would lay out its reasons. A Supreme Court opinion was critically important because of the way the court arrived at its conclusion.
Right, and it describes it and has it in writing so we can all learn from that in law school and otherwise.
That's right. And it wasn't just law school. I mean, I remember, it sounds a little quaint now, but being involved in discussions with friends about what the court decided and the reasons that it used. And sometimes the reasons were pretty compelling, even though we didn't agree with the conclusions. But now the court is using the so-called shadow docket. It's making controversial decisions, but it's not explaining them. And if you don't explain your controversial decisions, then you're leaving the public completely on the public's own. I mean, you can come up with conspiracy theories galore.
Right. And it's the same confusion, uncertainty,
exactly,
worry,
when you get
fear.
To the stage of confusion and uncertainty and worry, and you don't know why things are being done,
or that they're being done, it feels very.
That's when conspiracy theories
thrive.
flower.
Yeah, flower.
And it's why. I mean, John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, one of his major responsibilities is to assure the public that the court is thinking, that it has a logic, that it has some justification. Because the Supreme Court has no army, it has no ability to fund anything.
It has reason. It has premises and conclusions, and we get to watch it.
That's all it has. And so for this week, it had a whole variety of shadow docket decisions that backed up, things that the administration was doing with no reason.
Remind us when you were at the hearing for John Roberts. What was that like?
Well, I did testify, and I testified against him because I had gone through his record and found somebody who seemed to me to be not a bad guy. I mean, actually people liked him, but somebody who was out of the mainstream of American discourse, so far to the right, wanted to centralize power in the president in ways that seemed to be, at that time, very, very radical. He also was coming down so hard as a judge on certain defendants that seemed to be, again, way out of line with what the normal mainstream American value was. And so I testified. I tried to be balanced. I tried to be reasonable, but I testified against him.
So interesting.
Had no effect whatsoever.
Well, I mean, I think you said your piece. That's the point of a hearing. You were there and other people were there.
That's the point of the hearing. But it's the Roberts Court will go down in history, I think, as one of the weakest, if not worst, Supreme Courts. Because the Supreme Court, I used to argue before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court understood. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm a typical old fart who just is.
You're an atypical old fart.
I'm an atypical old fart.
I've always told you that.
That's such a nice thing for you to say. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So as an atypical old fart, I remember the Supreme Court being a court that overall understood its role to protect the minority from majoritarianism, and that minority was a black minority, or it was a brown minority, people of color. It was often women, but it understood its role in the system of power to guard people that didn't have power. And now the Supreme Court is just the opposite. Now the Supreme Court seems to believe that it is constitutionally obligated to interpret statutes and the Constitution in ways that support power.
Right. I looked up political assassination yesterday because I was so curious. And this, we're still, more is being revealed and we need to find out, what exactly happened, if we can ever find it all out specifically. But it mentioned a few categories of what counts as a political assassination. And one of the things was a murder that has to do with someone trying to reallocate power or making a statement about power, which I thought was so interesting.
That is interesting. Well, it's too easy, I think, to assume that every act of violence is a political act of violence.
Right.
I mean, you have got to look at the motive. To rush to judgment over Charlie Kirk's assassination and assume, even before the evidence was in, even before they had a suspect, that it was political assassination or political violence, I think was unfair. And
Unfair, but then people love to do that and then say, told you so. So it feels like a double gotcha.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Charlie Kirk himself was a very controversial figure. He was not a martyr. He is not a martyr.
I think the New York Times had a great article this is where he stood on things like race, immigration, climate, women, abortion. His views were very strong.
His views were strong, and they were talk about out of the mainstream.
Exactly.
I mean, they were pretty far to the right, and he was a very, very close ally of Donald Trump. But still, political violence is political violence.
Right.
There is no place for it, regardless of what you think and what you believe and who you dislike. It's a tragedy. I mean, clearly it is a tragedy.
I know.
It's a tragedy for the country.
So what else do we do? So you said deliberation. We need to remember that we are founded, a democracy requires ample deliberation and the setup to be able to do that.
And I want to go a little bit deeper on that point, Heather, because we assume that democracy is just about voting. If it's just about voting, we could have a system conceivably at some time in the future where everybody on their iPhone, was asked how they feel about a particular issue, and bing, you do it.
Phone-in voting.
Phone-in voting. You literally phone-in voting about everything. That's not democracy. Democracy also requires some thought, some willingness to understand the issue, and ability to change your mind or change your views if there are good arguments on the other side. So it is both voting, it's also deliberating. It's a process. It's respecting a process of your representatives and
work.
Courts. It's a lot of work. And it is not a spectator sport. It is work. It's work to do it. It's work to defend it.
Yep.
And maybe, when I get into my rose-colored glasses or my
I'm going to get you a pair.
My silver lining.
Get you a pair of rose-colored glasses to put on.
I say to myself, well, when we get through this horrible period of time, assuming we get through it, not only will people understand the meaning of a lot of things they were taking for granted, like democracy and due process and the rule of law, but people will understand how important it is to fight for and be diligent about and watch carefully to preserve these democratic institutions.
And to participate
norms.
And be active.
And be active. And be active. We tend to say somebody is an activist. Well, we all need to be activists.
Right.
There shouldn't be just a little group over here who are activists, quote
right.
unquote. And activism means... What do you think? I mean, for you, what does activism mean?
Well, I have an example from the week, which was the Last Class film, which we've talked about, and I don't want to talk about that now, but there was an event where someone from the community brought this film to Folsom, California, and she considers herself an activist. She's very engaged in her community. She's engaged in democracy. She's done Get Out the Vote campaigns. She is a violinist in her local orchestra. I mean, she is community engaged. I think part of activism has to do with that. But she said, I decided to bring this film here, and she sold out the theater to the point that she had to get a second bigger one. And she met all these new people who were coming out to have conversations and to
in her community.
Yeah. To get reinvigorated and say, what gives us hope? What is democracy? What are we doing? And there were some fruitful conversations in the lobby, outside of the theater. And it was interesting. People were debating things. There were people talking about Gaza and Israel. I was in one conversation about that. And people weren't high-fiving and feeling exactly the same on that issue. They were hearing each other out. And it was a sense of bringing together community in real life, which we do not enough, I think.
In real time. Well, that's interesting. I would add that I think, fairly to what democracy requires. That is, it needs to be rooted in community. It's rooted in a group of people who are living in proximity and are working together and are meeting together and are playing together and who know each other, not as buddies, but at least understand that they have a common good. That's where the common good begins in community.
And I think there are different roles to play, and that's okay, and that's fabulous. So this one person took on the mantle, did the organizing, was fed by it, negotiated with the theater, got the other things, signs, microphones, blah, blah, blah. And then other people said, well, I can't do that, but I'm going to show up, and I'm happy to show up. And so it's a mix of participation, but everyone was participating.
And I think that's again part of the notion of democracy. Is not everybody can be a leader. Not everybody can be and has the time or the will or maybe even the
interest,
talent to do it. But we can all help. We can all show up.
Right.
Showing up is a big part of it.
I know. I think showing up, and this, we could talk about the elections that we've been part of recently. But so again, Donald Trump is not popular when you look at polls and specifically the economic polls. We haven't even gotten into economics this week. I don't think we should. Can we wait till next week?
We can, because I think that people really are still in a state of shock, not only about Charlie Kirk's assassination, but also about the response to it and how deeply the wound is in terms of this nation. People have said to me over the last couple of days, are we going to face a civil war? Is this the beginning of a civil war? And at first, when it was first asked to me, I didn't know how to respond because I thought, well, how could we even contemplate a civil war? It's not as if we're in an economic calamity, not as if we're in
outside
depression,
forces are knocking on the
There's not a
door?
world war. There's not there's not a Great Depression. There's not a terrible pandemic. What would possibly pull us apart? There are issues
inside, right?
But we could be moving toward a kind of state of deep distrust. Red state, blue state, red city, blue city. Because there are no leaders who are pulling us together. There are no leaders who are reminding us of our common good.
Right.
And that is, I think, the biggest danger.
Right.
Here we are in California. Well, how much do we have in common with Kansas? We have a lot in common with Kansas. Kansas has
Kansas. Why are you bringing up Kansas?
Well, because there was a book years ago called
What's
the Matter with Kansas?
Right.
And I was years ago. Even before that book, I was traveling across the country in my Mini Cooper. I had just bought a Mini Cooper.
Oh, right. Not the VW Bug, because you wrote about that in your book.
Yeah, no, this is a Mini Cooper.
Okay, this is later.
This is the first Mini Cooper, very few. And I was in Kansas, and I pulled up to a gas station, and there was a line, and some truckers came up, and they knocked on my window. And I lowered the window, and I said, can I help you? And they said, what is this car?
Yeah.
They had never seen it. And I said, well, it's a Mini Cooper. And then they said, and these are these big, trucking people, they said, how does anybody fit in there?
And did you step out? Ta-da.
I did. I stepped out.
And you said, hop in. I'll give you a ride.
I said, no problem. and then I said, and I shouldn't have said this. I said, I'm from Massachusetts, and everybody from Massachusetts.
You should not have said that.
Is under 5 feet tall.
No.
Yes. Anyway, but people around the country, there are differences, but the similarities are way outweigh
of course.
the differences. And even immigration. A hot button topic. It's always been a hot button topic.
Yes.
Always. We've had
since we first all emigrated here, it was a hot button topic.
Not all of us. The native population.
That's my point.
Indigenous
it has been a topic for us.
They're the only ones who have any kind of standing to object to immigration. But my great grandparents came over here, and not everybody was happy that they were here, but we all as a nation, we are a nation of immigrants, and it's different. I think European nations, when they respond to immigration and they move to the right because of immigration, are doing so in a slightly different way than we are. In those European nations that have deep, long-standing, thousand-year ethnicities, immigrants pose a different kind of challenge than they do here. And it's always been a challenge here, but we've always met the challenge, not by saying no immigrants, but by figuring out how to assimilate.
Yeah. And it's hard to navigate. I mean, how are you consuming news these days? I mean, if you open up something like Twitter, God forbid, watching, I mean, it feels like people are just either saying, we're right or you're wrong. Right? It's like, I feel like I'm being screamed at in a lot of things.
And sometimes in capital letters.
Right.
And I wonder who started that one.
Yeah, I know.
Well, that's true. And I think that on social media, people do have an opportunity, because they're anonymous many times, to just vent. They just vent. There's a lot of venting going on. But, Heather, I think that venting is different from where the typical person actually is. I think what we see when we look at the comments, especially on some place like X, which has become a cesspool after Elon Musk has kind of encouraged it to become a cesspool, I think we see just the tip of the iceberg of particularly people who are so angry. Most people are not that angry. The rest of the iceberg really is
worried, fearful.
Is fearful, and fear is close to anger, granted, but they are not uncivil.
Right. Well, I'm glad we did this.
Well, I'm glad too.
And thanks, people, for showing up.
Yes, and thank you to all of you. Let me just make a final observation, if I may.
Yes, please, you may.
And I hope you have a good week coming up.
I mean,
it's going to be better.
You too.
But let me just say this to all of you. It has been a hard week, obviously, not just because Charlie Kirk was assassinated, but also because the response to the assassination, because of the deep divisions in perhaps your community, even your family, exacerbated by all of this. But I hope for you, my wish for you, is that you understand that far more unites us as a society, as a series of communities, as a polity. Far more unites us than divides us. And there is very little money to be made in finding those points of connection and unity. But that may be part of the problem. I think that we as a society need to look for every way we can to remind ourselves of the values that we hold in common, what that common good actually is. And it is especially difficult now when we have a leader and a regime that is doing everything it possibly can to pull us apart. One final thought. The oligarchy, that is, the people who have never made as much money, the big corporations that are bigger than ever, they would like us to be divided. Because when we're divided, when we're angry with each other, when we make each other the enemy, when we demonize each other, we don't look upward and see where all the power and the wealth have actually gone. So, another reason not to be susceptible to this anger and this divisiveness. Heather?
See you in a week.
See you in a week. Take care.